Welcome to day 11 of the Faith Talks pod. This is our daily Bible reading plan. Let's break down today's reading. In Genesis chapter 25, we step right into the story and find a familiar tension going on, and that is barrenness. Rebekah not being able to conceive was not just a family issue, but it actually threatened the very survival of Abraham's covenant line. God had promised many descendants to Abraham, but the womb meant to carry that promise was empty. And I almost have a feeling that God does this on purpose. It's almost like he lets the situation look impossible so that when the promise finally comes alive, nobody can say it was human strength. It's God almost stamping his signature on the story. But once Rebekah does conceive, the pregnancy becomes very painful and chaotic. The Hebrew wording suggests violent struggling inside of her. And in the ancient Near East, when life did not make sense, especially something as mysterious as pregnancy, people sought what was called an oracle, or rather a divine explanation. The text does not tell us exactly how she received that oracle. No prophet, no priest, no device, because the method isn't really the point, right? The message is the point. And God tells her something shocking. 2 nations are in your womb. What feels like conflict is actually a calling. What she interprets as trouble is actually prophecy. God is shaping history inside of Rebekah, and he says the younger will outrank the older, a complete reversal of cultural norms. So what's the big takeaway here? Sometimes the struggle inside of you is not a sign of something wrong, but it's a sign of something bigger than you that is being born. And as we progress in Genesis chapter 25, we find Esau and Jacob and the whole situation with the birthright. To understand what's happening in this scene, you've got to picture how inheritance worked in the ancient Near East. The birthright was not something mystical, some blessing floating in the air, but it was a material, legally recognized right. And when a father died, the inheritance was divided as such. You would count the number of sons you had, and then you would add an extra share. So in this case, you had Esau and Jacob, so you have 2 shares, and then you would add an extra share, which caused there to be 3, which would result in 1 share going to Jacob and the remaining 2 shares going to Esau. So the oldest son always received a double portion. That means if there were 2 sons like Jacob and Esau, the inheritance was divided into 3 shares. Esau would normally take 2 and Jacob would take 1. So when Jacob offers Esau stew in exchange for this birthright, he isn't buying every share. He's just specifically purchasing Esau's extra share, which is the double portion. It's almost like Esau here is saying, I'll give up my advantage. I'll give up my future leverage. I'll settle for equal instead of double. Historically, that kind of deal is extremely unusual. In fact, in all known ancient Near East legal documents, there isn't a single example of this actually happening. The closest we get is a document from Newsy where a brother sells some property he already inherited, but never the birthright before the father dies. So what Jacob and Esau are doing here is unprecedented, and it's radical, and it's shocking to an ancient reader. And here's where it gets kind of preachy, right? Esau traded the future for the present. He traded legacy for his lunch. He traded long-term blessing for a short-term comfort. But the text says Esau despised his birthright, not because he hated it emotionally, not because he, when we think of despise, we think of, he hated it, but he didn't hate his birthright. He just treated it as it was cheap. And he valued the moment more than he valued the mission. He valued appetite more than he valued the assignment. Jacob wasn't perfect, right? But he did see the value of the birthright. And Esau wasn't necessarily evil either. But he did not value what God had placed in his life. And that's really the heart of the story, is that you can lose God-given potential, not because someone stole it, but because you just didn't value what God gave you. And it's so important that we value the things God gives us. Esau walked away full, but he also walked away empty. And Jacob walked away with a bowl of stew, but he walked away with destiny. And in every generation, God asks this question: are you the one who squanders the birthright, or are you the one who recognizes its worth? Matthew chapter 8 and verse 28 through 34. This story is something strange and dramatic, and honestly, it's terrifying because we have these two demon-possessed men that are from the region of the Gadarenes. And it's a moment that reveals the power of Christ, but the reality of spiritual warfare at the same time, that demons could actually possess people, and the uncomfortable truth that not everyone really wants Jesus near when he starts shaking things up. So you'll notice that Matthew actually mentions two demon-possessed men in his account, but Mark only focuses on one demon-possessed man. And scholars give a few explanations for this. Matthew often doubles his characters, so this was normal in Jewish storytelling of the time. Matthew may have known of a second man that Mark intentionally didn't focus on, or Matthew includes two here because he omits another exorcism story found in Mark chapter 1. Matthew says that these men lived among the tombs, a place considered ceremonially unclean and believed to be a hangout spot for evil spirits. And these guys were mildly troubled. The Bible says that they were so violent that no one could even pass by them. This is the kind of place I would think that most people would avoid. But of course, Jesus doesn't stop, and he is not scared. And what does he do? He pulls right up to the banks of the Sea of Galilee, and he actually goes there on purpose. Matthew says Gadara and Mark says Gerasa, but both are Gentile cities in the Decapolis region. They're hostile to Jewish culture. They're filled with pigs, which Jews considered unclean. Historically, Gerasa was a major city 30 miles away, while Gadara was only about 6 miles away and controlled by the surrounding land. So regardless, the event likely took place in the territory owned by Gadara, but associated with the broader region of Gerasa. Nothing contradictory there. It's just layers of geography. Well, when Jesus steps out of that boat, the demons immediately cry out, "Have you come to torture us before the time?" And what are they talking about? They're talking about the day of judgment. Even demons know God's timeline. They know Jesus is the judge. They know the lake of fire is coming. They just didn't expect the Messiah to show up 2 times, a first coming and a second coming. Well, nearby is a herd of pigs, and there's hundreds of them. And look, this is Gentile country, so pigs are a part of the economy. Commentators note that demons try to negotiate the least painful outcome. They prefer unclean places, and so unclean animals would have made sense. In fact, an ancient Jewish listener would have said, well, of course, the demons went into pigs. That makes sense. And Jesus permits it. The pigs rush off a cliff into the sea, and they drown. And historically, Jews believed demons could be bound in deep waters. So Matthew's audience would understand that these demons were now immobilized and that they were destroyed. Funny enough, the herdsmen run into town, and word is spreading fast. And instead of celebrating the deliverance of 2 tortured men, you would think that they would be celebrating having rid their city of these 2 demon-possessed men. But no, what do? They tell Jesus to pack his bags and get on out of town, because to them, Jesus looked dangerous. He's disrupting their economy. He just killed all these pigs that was meant to help them get money and put food on their tables. And miracle workers in the Gentile culture were seen as sorcerers, dangerous men. So what's the takeaway here? Some people would rather keep their demons than lose their money. Some communities would rather cling to familiar bondage than accept disruptive freedom. And it speaks to this truth that Jesus will confront what we often tolerate, whether we like it or not. And so this story asks one simple question: what happens when Jesus steps into your dark places? Do we welcome him, or do we ask him to leave? Jesus delivers, he restores, and he liberates. But his freedom often disrupts the areas of our lives we've grown comfortable with. And when he confronts the things hiding in the tombs of our soul, the question becomes this: will we be like the delivered man or the terrified townspeople?